Hello and welcome to this session on everyday experiences. In this session we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. I am going to be using an approach that involves providing you with information about this session beforehand, so transferring this to you before class. And so that means that in class we're able to engage with the discussions together. So the seminar will be dedicated to discussing the ideas in these little recordings. How am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to be putting together 3 short recordings that present some of the key ideas and concepts. As you'll see in each recording, pauses have been integrated into each short clip for you to quite literally pause the recording and undertake a set activity. So, for example, go to a particular reading, watch a clip, listen to a podcast, reflect on questions being asked, take notes that you'll be bringing to the in-class discussion, or indeed go and look for further readings. And what this allows you to do is interact with the materials before class, whether they're clips, other media, that we will then be using to develop our discussion when we're together. The session aims, so the main aim of this session is to explore what we mean by everyday experiences and consider how we might understand that through a critical engagement with the idea of the everyday, looking at physical and symbolic borders, and exploring encounters and interactions in a range of social contexts. And hopefully what we'll be able to do is connect this up with how we unsync binaries and how we talk about and analyse migration. So part 1, the everyday. And here we come to our first pause. And what I'd like you to do here is think about these questions from the course material. Up to this point, what you have been looking at, engaging with, reading about, discussing. And think about this in preparation for this particular session. Take each question in turn and note down questions. Where are everyday spaces? What are everyday encounters? What is the everyday? Who do they belong to? Who does the everyday belong to? Who can make claims to everyday encounters? And if the everyday is about routine, as I'll go on to explain, then what does this mean for understanding migration and the experiences of migration as exceptional? Or, in fact, can we understand them as the norm? So the everyday, I think it's important to shift to this unpacking of the everyday context because, yes, understanding the everyday can be about routine behaviours and practices that people develop and which they enact repeatedly day in and day out in order to manage and resolve many of those immediate demands of our material existence. So food, clothing, shelter, cooking, dressing, and looking after our home. And often it is about what happens at home or in the immediate local areas and neighbourhoods in which we live. Everyday life, in many respects, is characterised by a kind of stability, some kind of persistence to the practices of everyday life that are reproduced and recreated over time so that they form structures and patterns of behaviour that shape our social life over wide areas and over long periods. But there's also other reasons for thinking about the everyday, and a sociological perspective involves trying to recognise large patterns in social life through an understanding of systematic inequalities. And by here we mean the way in which class or gender or immigration status, say, affect the lives of people that people lead across different social contexts. Understanding these patterns can help us understand social worlds. They exist and they are in an important way recreated and given force in and through people's ordinary lives. If you think about migration and the experiences of migrants as they navigate everyday life, it reveals some of the most enduring forms of structural inequality in our social life and the continuing forms of disadvantage and denial that affect certain, but not all, migrants. And the final point here that's important is that it's not only that these social structures are remade or that they take effect in people's everyday lives, it's also where they are experienced. It is where they are felt. They become that lived experience. And it's important that we grasp an understanding of that. So another important reason why, as social scientists and practitioners, we might want to pay attention to everyday life and be critical, is because it is important not just to know what is happening to who, how many times it's happening, in what dimensions. It's not just about understanding the size and scope of patterns in social life, but it's also about giving voice to, expressing, hearing the experience of those things in people's lives. So mapping out changes and paying attention to how changes affect people's lives. And thinking critically about the everyday as a site of inequalities is an important foundation for unpacking the everyday context. And we can begin to think about where bordering processes are, where we might encounter these in the everyday. Broadening this out provides a way into an everyday approach that can find connections between social, cultural and political processes, how they filter through into the realm of everyday exchange and meaning making. People seeking asylum, for example, face ever more insidious forms of social controls on a daily basis, including immigration enforcement officers on public transport and regulations within housing, as we'll go on to explore. To give one example, this notice appeared in an accommodation facility run by Serco, a private accommodation detention, offering private accommodation detention to female asylum seekers. And they were told that they would be reported to the Home Office for leaving bedroom doors open because that could be a fire hazard. And in this way, everyday actions become border offences.